with it, all right? So let's start off with Illustrator. If you pop it open, I just want to create a very simple little character. And don't put a whole ton of effort into this so you get behind. It'll just be a very simple kind of a stick character. But I want to make it kind of specific size and whatnot. So I'm in Illustrator, and I'm going to make a 1080 by 1080. Pixel by 1080 pixel composition, and I want it to be RGB because we're working with screen stuff. So anytime we're working with screen, we're going to work with RGB. So we'll change the CMYK color to RGB. Resolution only has to be 72. So this is going to be our Illustrator file, and let's just give it a name to start off with. And this will be our character. So we're going to do a teeny tiny amount of character animation. Not anything crazy, but something simple. So the composition is, like I said, 1080 pixels by 1080 pixels. RGB color, 72 dpi. Create that. Anytime we want to combine, we want to use Photoshop, Illustrator, any other program with After Effects, we have the opportunity that if we actually save our files appropriately, all on different layers, then we can actually animate all those individual elements in After Effects when we get in there. If we put them all on one layer, it's going to import them as one flat piece of art, which in some cases could be what you want. If you're just creating individual elements, you want a city skyline or something like that, that's fine. But if we're doing a character or any other kind of animation like that, we're going to want to save, whenever we create the character, we want to put all the different elements that we want to illustrate or animate on different layers. So I've got my 1080 square document, and apparently the TV is going to be finicky. Hold on, let's try this again. There we go. All right, 1080 square file, and I just want to create a few different layers. So we're going to make a cat kind of a thing. So I'm going to start off, we're going to name all of our layers too, so it's easy to tell what's what. So my first layer, I'm going to make this just be the head. So there's our head, and I'm just going to drop an ellipse on it. So let's do an ellipse kind of like that. And I'm just going to fill it with green color. Of some kind. No. I had this happen to me before. Earlier today. What the heck? Let's fill this with I guess I could go back to the file I already have prepared for it, but what did I do? Let's see. All right. I'm going to use a different character to actually do mine, but here's what I want you to make. One layer, put your head on, give it a color, make him orange, make him green, whatever you want him to be. There we go. And I'm just going to give him a stroke, put a stroke around it of like 16 points or so. And then let's create another layer. So our head's just an oval. We'll create another layer for eyes. And on this layer, let's just do a couple of black circles. We'll toss them in here. So make sure we're naming all of our layers all the way through. We got our head, we got our eyes. Let's do a nose. So a new layer, call it nose. And we'll make that shaped like that. Got our eyes, nose. Let's give him a layer of whiskers. So there. And let's do whiskers right and whiskers left. And we're just going to use a line tool for that. And I don't know, make the whiskers 16 points or so. So those are my whiskers on the right, and let's do a set of whiskers on the left. And then last but not least, we want ears, right ear and left ear. We've got our right ear. Oops, cut that. Right ear. And then a left ear. So when we're done, this is kind of what we have. And I'm just going to drag the right ear and the left ear down behind the head so that all looks right. Very simple character, nothing much to him. Doesn't need to be. But every animatable element is on its own layer. And that's the important thing. So I've got all these layers. If you've only got a couple, just make sure that anything you want to animate is on its own layer. All right? And I'm just going to make his ears a little bit larger. So I'll tweak mine up a little bit while I'm waiting on you to finish yours. Let's do that. All right. So maybe on the head I'll put I'll give him a mouth. All right. My mouth I'm not going to animate. So I just made it part of the head. So I've got all these different elements. Whenever you're done, save him to wherever you save your files. Visual media. After Effects. And character. And just save it as an AI file. That's all we need. So we've created our very simple kind of a character this way. While you're finishing those off, the reason we put everything on its own separate layer is because we're able to actually bring in files from outside of After Effects. And if we bring it in right, the way it'll treat it as is like the artboard will be a composition. And then each of the different layers that we have within our file will be treated as individual elements within that composition. And, you know, depending upon some of the selections we make will depend upon how it comes in. But nonetheless, by layering everything, we're able to animate each of these individual things. Bless you. Each of these individual things in After Effects. So, but when we create them, especially if we've got, you know, this is a fairly simple character, but if I was doing the full body, I'd have all of these plus the body of the cat, legs, maybe his legs would be jointed. I don't know. You know, we can build this out pretty deep. We're just going to keep it simple as the head of a cat for right now. So everything gets its own layer, and it's going to come into After Effects that way. We can also, so long as, and a tip with these Illustrator files, or even Photoshop files for that matter, after we get this into After Effects, if we need to go back and make a small little change to one of our layers, to like the ears, say I decide I want to go back and make the ears dark inside, I can do that and it'll update into After Effects. But the one thing I can't do is go back into the Illustrator file after I've imported it and started animating it, and I can't add new layers and expect those to come into After Effects. As of the time of this demo, it doesn't do that. I would expect that to be something that they would be good for them to do, but nonetheless, you got to have kind of the right number of layers. So what I'll usually do is if I'm building out, you know, something simple, I'll usually build a few extra layers into it and name them so that I can always go back and add more art elements if I, you know, different layers, animated layers if I need to. So anyway, but that's kind of the short on that. So I've got this guy made. Yeah. A little bit. All right. So he's done. All my different layers. Make sure he's saved. And then we're going to go to After Effects. So if you launch After Effects and create a new project, go ahead and do that and then save it as well. Save as. And this will be my character. All right. Actually, we'll call it character art. Or character animation. So do we all have at least a simple character with layers in it that we can work with? Because I'll hold up until everybody's got it. I don't want to get too far ahead of you. We good? Yes? What space? Workspace? I've got standard pulled up. You know what? Those are my libraries. I've got extensive libraries for clients, so that's what that is. I get a new client, I build libraries for them that I can share between all of my different apps. So, all right. So now, what was the, say? Oh, for the comments, I did 1080 by 1080 by 1080 square. So the reason I made it 1080 by 1080 square was I knew that I just had the head of this cat that I wanted. I just wanted to be plenty big enough to be able to work with. Sometimes, depending upon what you're animating, I mean, a lot of times I'll actually create an artboard that's 2 times the size, like a 4K size. So like if I'm building a 1920 by 1080 animation and I'm doing like a city with, you know, some sort of, you know, a city with a character in it, you know, that's being animated, I'll build that like 2 times the size of that I actually need it so I can work with it. But this, we just had the head of this character, and that seemed to be a good size for a 1920 by 1080 composition, or for a, yeah, composition, so. Really, for this exercise, if you've got 2 or 3 layers in your Illustrator file, that'll be enough to work with, so. All right. All right. So when I import this file, I'm going to import it kind of special. And there's varying settings, but we're going to do a specific set of settings so we can utilize all of these layers. Like I said, all the settings have their purpose. They're, and it's all kind of based on what you're doing. You just you just make your best decision. But if nothing else, it's always safe to do it the way we're going to do it for this character. So in order to make sure all the different layers come in. So everybody does have an Illustrator file to work with? Yeah? All right. So I'm just going to go File, Import, File, which is all I need. And don't get ahead of me. And I get this window. And here's my character. There's my Illustrator file, my AI file. But don't click OK yet. Don't click Open yet. So I want to go down here to these settings at the bottom of this import window. And I can ignore the first one. All acceptable files. Make sure I got my character selected. The format's Illustrator. So import as. There are several different options here. Footage being the first one. If I just want to import this character as one layer, I have no intentions of animating him whatsoever, I might choose footage, which will just bring in the composition flattened as one image. But that's not what I want. What I want to do is actually create a composition, and I want to retain all of my layer sizes, which is the one I want. The option below that, composition, will give me something similar, but not exactly the same. So if I select composition, retain layer sizes, every layer that I had in my Illustrator file will come into After Effects at the size the actual element on that layer is. So it won't, the ears, for instance, won't be any bigger than the ears, all right? If I just choose composition, all of my layers are going to come in, but they're all going to come in at the size of my composition. So my little, my little ears will have a bounding box around them that's the full size of the composition. And in this particular case, for animating a character, that's not what I want. There might be a use for that, but that's the difference between these three. So, having said all of that, select your character and import as composition, retain layer sizes. And I think if you use this setting every time, you really can't go wrong. And create composition should be checked right below it. So there's my import settings. Composition, retain layer sizes, and create composition. And when I say open, I've got a composition for my character, and every single layer from my Illustrator file is a separate element inside of that composition. Yeah. So if you just save the Illustrator file, its natural format is AI. That's the default format. Yeah. So actually, whenever you import it into After Effects, you mean? Yeah. Okay. So when you import it, the options you should have are footage, not what you want. Footage will flatten everything. The second option is composition, retain layer sizes. That's the one you want. Now, actually, you don't have, it should just be composition, retain layer sizes, and then make sure composition is checked beneath that, and then say import. Is that not what you got? You got it? Okay. Anybody else? Since I'm up? No? Okay. All right, so we got our guy in here, and this is just our character. It's not the actual composition we're going to animate in. So the first thing, after doing our import, that we want to look at is nesting compositions. Nesting elements within your composition is a very common and desirable thing to do in order to keep things grouped together and organized. And you can create compositions at a variety of stages throughout working in After Effects, but we're just going to take this composition that we imported, our cat, and we're going to put them into another document. So I'm going to create another composition. I've got my cat here. I'm going to create another composition at 1920 by 1080 and 24 frames per second, and say OK. 1920 by 1080, 24 frames a second. And I'm just going to call this my main comp. Give it a name, some sort of name so you can keep it straight. And say, let's see, 15 seconds long is probably fine. Mine's set to 15 seconds. That sounds reasonable. So do that, say OK. And here's our main comp. And so there's our main comp. And I'm just going to drop my character composition, my cat, select that from my project panel, and drop it onto my main comp. And everything's there. All right. So the first thing I did is I nested, basically, so I've nested my character composition into my main composition. So I've nested my first composition. For the next few things, I'm going to actually go back out of here into the character composition. We're going to work there for a few minutes, but I wanted to sort of put him into my timeline so that he's there. And notice that, it's a composition, so if I move him around, everything goes with it because all of his features live inside of that character composition. So I'm going to go back, so I'm going to go out of my main comp back into this character composition. And I can either do it from my project panel, or if I double click on that composition in my timeline, that'll open it right up. And in this composition, if I click on Likey's head and move it, I can just move the head around. So this is the first thing we want to remedy. If I've got a cat and he's got a head and I want to move his head, rotate it, or whatever else, everything needs to go with it, right? I mean, does no good if it doesn't. So we can do what's called parenting. Basically parent all of the features of the cat onto the head, because the head's the main, that's the main structure. Any place the head goes, everything else should follow. And then I also want to consider, so the first thing we're going to look at parenting. And then the second thing we want to look at is we want to give some thought to, if we want to animate this guy, how are his different features going to move? Maybe we want to parent a couple of different things. Maybe we don't want to just do one parenting object. So before I parent all the features to the head, let's take a look at this. If I decide I want my ears, for instance, to wiggle back and forth. If I select one of my ears, grab my rotate tool, and wiggle it back and forth. Right now, the center point, the anchor point, is right in the middle of that element. And the way it's moving isn't really what I want, right? Because, we're kind of seeing the corners of what falls behind the head, and that doesn't look very good. So the first thing we want to do is move our center point, or our ankle point, down to where we think those ears should actually rotate. And if I just, selecting this ear, the right ear, if I come out here next to it, remember there's our lock where we can lock the layer. Right next to that is another box with a little dot in it, and that's the solo element. If I click on that solo box, everything else disappears, but the ear stays on the screen. This way I can see the entire thing and move my center point around. It doesn't mean that everything's going to go away or that I've lost everything else. It's just I'm focused. They call it solo. I've also referred to it as, or heard it referred to as focus. So you're focusing on that particular item. But with our right ear, grab this anchor point pan behind tool, and let's just drag our center point down here somewhere close to the base of the ear. So that when we rotate it, it doesn't rotate off the middle of the ear, it rotates off of this point down here. And then I'm going to go to my left ear and I'm going to do the same thing. So if I select the left ear, click solo, it'll come up. And I'll move my center point or my anchor point down to the base of that ear as well. Turn off my two solo dots to get my entire cat back. Check my rotate tool, and that's a little more like it. I don't get those corners. I probably should have actually built the ear a little bit bigger, but this will work. And we want to look at all of our different elements this way. Whatever it is we want to animate, the first thing, and this actually this process and any kind of this process, no matter what it is we're building, whether it's a character or another object of some kind, is referred to as rigging. This is very light rigging, but we're rigging up our character so that we can animate him. And so I'm going to go to my whiskers. If I want to wiggle the whiskers, that's not very natural, right? Because the whiskers are probably actually going to wiggle off the base. So I'm going to do the same process again. I'm going to solo both my whiskers, grab my anchor point tool, and I'm going to move the anchor point to the very base of my whiskers. So that now if I grab my rotate tool now, whenever I rotate them, they wiggle from the base. So I've got them both set up that way. When I'm done, I'm going to turn off my solo buttons so I get everything back. And the only items I really have left, I've got the head. You know, if I rotate the head, it's going to rotate off the middle. I'm thinking if I want to rotate it left, Tilly's head left or right, it should be at sort of the joint of the base where the neck is. So I'm just going to go ahead and move that center point from the middle of the head to the base. Maybe right about there. And everything else should be okay, really. My eyes, I didn't do the eyes individually. I did them as one unit, so if I was thinking ahead, I probably would have made right and left eyes, but I didn't, so that's all right. And then our nose, center point's right in the middle. That's probably a good spot. So the rest of us should be good. We just want to make sure we move those anchor points for the right and left ears and the right and left whiskers so that those items rotate on the right area to look relatively real or reasonable. Move like an actual ear or whisker would move. All right? So is everybody with me so far, or do I need to hold for a moment? I can hold for a moment. Are we all good? We're just kind of setting up our character. All right. Okay. So we've rigged him up. We moved his ears into the center points into position for the whiskers and the ears. Let's think about how some other elements here might move. Maybe my whiskers could move independently for sure, but maybe they would actually, if he wiggles his nose, I would think that the whiskers would probably move a little bit as well, right? I mean, they're not really connected to the nose, but that whole area of the face is kind of together. So why don't we do our first parenting option with the whiskers and the nose? And what parenting is, let's zoom in here, is basically the concept of wherever the nose moves, I want the whiskers to move as well. Or wherever I want the head to move, the eyes, the ears should also go. So basically, all of the features of my cat are going to be children of the head. And I can set that by down here in my timeline. You should see parent and link in the very last column here, just before our 0 seconds. If you don't see parent and link, go to the very bottom of the menu, down here where it says toggle switches and modes. Oh, and look at that. It's actually on both. Right now I've got switches up. If I switch to modes, I've still got my parent links as an option. So, but I'm going to use this. So the first thing I want to do is, the whiskers are always going to move with the nose. So I'm going to select my left and my right whiskers. And like I said, they're going to always go with the nose. So I can do one of two things. I can either, with both of those selected, I can either come out here to this drop down where it says none, select one of them, and choose nose. And basically now, anytime I move the nose, if I grab my nose and move it, the whiskers are going to go with it. I'm not going to move them that much. What I'm more than likely going to want to do is maybe the nose actually kind of wiggles back and forth a little bit and the whiskers go with it. Something along those lines. So parenting is when basically we tell certain objects to follow another object. I guess is another way of saying it. That doesn't mean that I can't animate my whiskers independently. I can still select my whiskers, move them, oops, and then select my nose and move it, and the whiskers will follow it. I'm going to do that and put it all back to where it was. So the whiskers are parented to the nose. And then last but not least, I want to parent ears, eyes, nose, whiskers to the head. And I want to do this the same. I'm just going to go ahead and grab the nose. So I grab my nose, my eyes, my left ear, and my right ear. I can do these all together, or I can do them individually. I'm going to do this one slightly differently. I can still always select the drop-down menu, but see this little curly Q sitting right next to it? It's referred to as a pick whip. So if you hear me refer to a pick whip, look for the item in the area that I'm working in that's a little curly Q like this. If I click on that and drag the wire over top to the head, it will parent all of those objects to the head. So now if I select the head and move it, everything goes with it. But I can still move my other elements individually. My nose, remember I parented the whiskers to the nose. So now, I can animate this any number of ways. actually, it kind of gives me more options for animating them. It's kind of what it does. But I've got my character, I built him in Illustrator as separate layers, brought him into After Effects, and then I arranged him so that I can animate all the individual objects, but when I move the head, all the pieces, parts that belong to the cat head go with it. Parenting of objects. All right? Any questions so far before I move on? All right. So we got our guy made, and that's all great. So now I'm going to go out of, and actually I should probably save this at some point. So I'm going to go ahead and save my composition. So before I do that, one other thing I'll point out with saving in After Effects is that there's save as, but there's also this option down here called increment and save. What increment and save will do is, I've already saved this file once with nothing in it pretty much. If instead of save, I choose increment and save, it'll do a save as and call this version 1. And that's the element that I'll continue working on, saving the previous state of it to another file. So increment and save, I can, as I work my way through major milestones, I get major things set up, I can increment and save, and it'll save the previous state. So that if I really screw something up, which can happen, or if somehow something gets corrupted in this composition, I've got a previous version of this that I can go back to very easily. It's saving versions is basically what it is. So this first one I'm just going to save, but from here on out I'm going to increment and save. So I've saved this because I got the head all rigged up. I'm going to go back to my main composition now, where this guy is, and I'm going to animate here a little bit. And we're going to do a couple of different things. So, first thing I want to do is I don't want this transparent background on it. I'm going to go up to my Layer panel, New, select a solid, and just pick a color to make your background. I'm going to make it sort of a dark orange. So that's my cat's orange. Make my background kind of a dark orange. And slide that down below my character. And I'm just going to lock the background. I've got a background, I got my cat. And I can start animating. All right. So he's in here. I've got my composition with a background on it. I'm actually going to save a version of my cat. Like, basically I've rigged them all up. I don't want to lose that. So I'm going to make a copy of it. And if you just select the character or your cat, whatever that composition name is, in your project panel, right-click on it. No. If you just select it, go to the Edit menu, Duplicate, we can just duplicate a copy of this character. And I'm just going to call this, I want to rename this as Original. So if you just select that, tap Return on your keyboard, this is my original cat. I just duplicated him, so I have a backup copy. I can always go back to this one if I get things to a point that I don't like them. or if I decide I want to animate multiple versions of him, which we might do here as well. So we all still with me? Okay. So why don't we do something simple like with this guy to start with, like why don't we move him with our playhead at 0. Let's slide the head off our composition. And I'm just going to change position. I'm just going to slide him in. Actually, let's not do that. Put him back in the middle. Let's work backwards here. This is where I want him to end up, this position in the middle of my composition. So I'm going to slide my playhead across to like 1 second. This is as good a place to start as any. And select this character composition in my timeline. And if I tap the P key, that'll bring up my position parameter, my position transform. And since that's where I want the final position to be, I'm just going to set a keyframe for that. So I'm at 1 second, he's in the middle, let's set a keyframe for that position. And then grab your keyframe, playhead, or the current time indicator bar, slide it back to 0, select our cat, and just slide him off of the canvas. So that if we scrub ahead now, he comes in. So 1 second, he comes in, which is kind of slow, but we'll just do that for now. So I think that's a little slow. I don't really like the movement overall, but we'll take this in steps. We'll do a simple sort of slide in so that I don't have to watch my entire 15-second composition every single time I hit the playhead. I'm just going to slide my trim bar in to about 1.5 seconds, as well as my zoom bar, slide it in. So if I just tap the space bar, that's the speed at which my cat comes in. And it's not a very good movement. It's just very linear. It's same speed all the way across, comes across, plunks right in the middle of my canvas. So I want to start trying to refine this a little bit. And we do this by easing when we're doing keyframe animation. And the way we ease is that if I select this keyframe, the position that he's moving into, and I right-click on it, and go down to Keyframe Assistant, there are 3 options that should be highlighted: Easy Ease In, Easy Ease Out. And the one I'm going to pick depends upon the keyframe that I'm working on. So I picked his final position. You know, he's sliding across. This keyframe right here is where he's going to end up. I'm coming into that keyframe. So what I want to do is I want to easy ease in to that keyframe. So I want to select that, easy ease in. And you'll notice that the keyframe shape changes to this little arrow looking thing. So if I start over and play this across now, see how that comes in at a little easier pace? It still kind of plunks in, but It's a little quicker at first and it slows down as it gets to the last key, to the final keyframe. That's easing in. It sort of eases or slows in. When we look at our principles of animation, which we'll do probably when we come back, or maybe we'll do it tonight, I don't know. This is also referred to as slow in, just so you know. But that's how we kind of ease things in. And it's a subtle movement, but it's different. If we put two of them side by side, you see the difference much more clearly, actually. But that sort of eases us in there a little bit. And actually, maybe that's what we should do. Let's take this cat and let's select him and let's just scale him down. We're not going to keyframe this at all. I just want him to be smaller. All right. Scale him down kind of like that. And then I want you to go back and grab that same character composition in our project window and drag it down here onto our timeline, right up above. And I want you to scale him down a little bit. And slide him up above the other cat. Somehow, just position him above him. So we've got two cats on our screen. And we're going to do this exact same thing with this. We're going to right here at 1 second. This is where we want this cat to be. So let's select that one. Actually, I'll call this cat 2, just to keep them separate. Tap the P key on my keyboard for position. And I want to do the exact same thing. I want to set the position on that there. Come back to this point, 0, and slide him across. And what I want to do is make sure that these are right above each other. So I want these two guys to be exactly the same starting point at the front end. So the one I just put in has no easing on that last keyframe at all, but my original one does. So let's take a look at these if I play it through. And that's the difference that easing makes. The top one has no easing applied at all. The bottom one does. It actually, the time span is exactly the same. They start at 0 and they both arrive to their final position at 1 second. But the pace, the speed at which they move between those 2 points varies. Because on my original cat, I applied that easing, he moves faster at the beginning and slows as he gets into that final position. So the amount of, yeah. That's ease in. Yep. If I was going to ease out, it would be I would ease out of like the original point, which would go slower and then get faster towards the far end. But that's the difference that easing makes. The time span is the same, the way the movement behaves is different. So let's we can refine this easing even further. So if I select this I'm just going to, on the original cat, I'm just going to select that keyframe. I still want this one to be linear. I don't want to change that one, but let's select that keyframe. And there is, on our timeline, there's this little graph bar. So if you click on that graph, our timeline is going to change to this. Actually, yours will probably look like this. Is that the way yours looks when you go to the graph? Yep. This icon right here. It's the one right next to, in this row of icons at the top of the timeline, it's the closest to the timeline. It's called Graph Editor. So this is the value graph. And basically what this is showing us is that, we've eased into this keyframe, and what this line indicates is that it's moving quicker on the incline, but as it starts to level out, this line, it's actually slowing into its final position. But I think this is much easier to see, actually. I think that adjusting the easing is actually easier to work with if I look at the speed graph. And that's a little bit different. So this is our graph editor, or this is our value graph. But if I right click in this timeline area again, so I'll right click here, right below edit value graph is edit speed graph. And if I select that, this wire changes again. And I kind of feel like this one takes a little bit longer to kind of catch the hang of, but I feel like it's more effective in all cases, so I think it's worth using. I seldom use my value graph anymore. I almost always go straight into my speed graph. And what I can do here is, so basically it's moving, the display is a little bit different. It's moving very quick here through this area, but then it's slowing as it comes down. And if I select this point, you'll see that I get a little handlebar on it. If you click on that handlebar and hold down your shift key, you can change the shape of that wire. And having done that, watch the difference of the movement. This cat moves a lot quicker in the front end, but he really slowly eases into that last position. And the more I adjust this, I've pretty much actually cranked it up as far as it'll go, but we can kind of change how that behaves by adjusting the length of this handlebar. We can actually adjust the length of both of them. As you play around with those, you see you get a drastic difference in movement. But again, I haven't changed where my keyframes are. They're still at 0 and they're still at 1 second. And that's how we go about easing a character, an element into place. And we'll work more with this as we work through After Effects. There pretty much isn't anything that we won't apply easing to. So by the time we're done, you'll understand it pretty well. But that's the way we keep our animations from feeling really kind of static and stale. Any questions about that? Because that was kind of a lot. Okay. So we're kind of refining movement there. If I click on the speed graph again, I'll go back to my keyframes All that's still in place. Why don't we look at, let's do this again. We're going to look at a different movement on this cat. And then we're going to work back and forth between two compositions. So why don't we go ahead and create another composition. Leave this one alone. Let's create another composition, and let's just call this animation 2. And 1920 1080, 24 frames a second. We'll keep it at 15 seconds. And if I open that up, it's blank. But I want to set it up the same way that my other one was. So remember, we already put a solid in the background of our first composition. And if I go up here to my project window, there's a folder for solids. If I open it up, there's that dark orange I made. I'm just going to drag this down onto my composition. And I'm going to grab my cat character again, grab him, and drag him down above that background. And we're going to animate this guy in too, but we're going to do it just a hair bit differently. So doing the same things we did before, kind of repeat our steps. Move our playhead. Actually, let's scooch the trim bar and scooch the scale bar down. So if we move our playhead to 1 second, character, tap the P on our keyboard for position, set a keyframe, move back to the very beginning, and then let's just slide him off. So we get that. You got to start somewhere. We're going to bring him to 1 second. And actually, what I actually want to do is I want to change this movement up. Right now I just slide him in from point A to point B, but I want him to overshoot just a little bit, and then I want him to come back into this position. So I'm going to move my playhead up to about 18 frames or so, a little bit before my final position keyframe. And I'm just going to grab this and slide him over to this side of the composition at that point. So now my motion is going to be, he slides over to the end and bounces back to the middle. So he zips over and bounces back. And maybe when his head hits there, it actually, let's grab our rotate tool. It actually rotates a little bit. And then, so he's going to hit his head, it's going to rotate a little bit, and then roll back into position. That's what I want. And this isn't going to be quite right, but with my character selected, R on my keyboard for rotation, I'm going to set a rotation keyframe right there. Not what I want. So now I got to fix the ends. Just open this back up. So I rotated him to be there. So I want him to actually, I'm going to go back just a little bit before that, and I want to rotate this back to 0. And then, so he's going to come across, yeah. And I've just got to kind of rotate and move him into the positions I want him at each of these points. So we'll do that. So that's a little better. Still not, I still think that, let's see here. He starts rotating too early, I think. And I'm just going to fix that by grabbing my first, maybe we'll slide this over really close to the full rotation keyframe. There we go. Maybe he does that. A little closer maybe. So I'm starting to layer animation elements. And I can still kind of ease this in. You know, I'll go ahead and kind of, I mean, I want his head to kind of slam to a stop on this one side, but when he gets back across, I do want to ease into that a little bit. So maybe I'll just pick the rotation and the position keyframes there, the final ones. Right click on those and ease into those, easy ease in. When I do, it's a little easier movement when he rocks back into place. So I'm just kind of layering movements by and large. Still have everybody? Y'all still with me? All right. So now remember all that rigging we did originally of that cat? We haven't used them yet at all. We're going to use him now. So with nested compositions, here's what's kind of cool. I'm actually going to stretch my timeline out here just a hair, a little bit long. Pull this out to like 3 seconds. So, let's see, bumps to the side and he stays in the middle. And whenever he comes to rest, I want his face to do a few little things. Don't know what all they're going to do, but we're going to do it. So, if I go back into notice where my playhead is, or my current time indicator is sitting right here. If I double click and open up this character, you see where my playhead is here, or my current time indicator in this composition? This is exactly the same point of time that I have in my main comp, which is nice because if I'm over here and I know that, okay, so he comes to rest and I want his facial features or his motions to start from here, I place the playhead where I want it. I go into this character. Let's just sort of zoom in on him. And this is that same point in time. So I know that this is where I want to do the animations that I want to apply. So why don't we do something simple like, let's select his nose. And with this playhead right here, I'm going to tap the R key for rotate and set a keyframe and just move ahead. I'll really zoom in actually, I think. I'm just going to move ahead a hair, maybe a frame or so, a couple frames. And let's rotate it just a little bit. Move ahead a couple of frames. Rotate it back a little bit. A couple of frames. So I play it through, they just kind of wiggle back and forth a little bit. And if I come back now over into my main animation, animation 2, and I start this animation over, now I've animated his whiskers rotating back and forth. Probably should have brought him back to center. So let's go take a look at this again. There, and there. And then maybe after his whiskers wiggle, let's look at his eyes. Let's do scale here. So tap the S on my keyboard for eyes. For the eyes, I'm just going to do that. Go ahead a little bit with my selection tool. Blink his eyes. So his whiskers wiggle and his eyes blink. Let's see. Open, let's see. Open, closed, open. Maybe I want this to happen a couple more times. I'm just going to select the closed and open keyframes, copy those. And paste them. So, whiskers wiggle. Whoop. What did I do? I grabbed the wrong keyframes, I think. They're open, they're closed, they're open. Maybe it's just the speed they're happening at. Maybe I need to select all of those, hold down my option key, push it out a little bit. Oh, that's why. Goofy things. And if I go back to my main animation, he zooms in. So I'm doing my animations in multiple compositions in order to get a look that I want. But the major things to kind of point out here about everything I did was that I've got, I created my cat, imported it, the composition of it, and I've actually used this cat, the same character composition, over and over several different times and animated it differently in my different compositions that I've kind of put together here. And I can still wiggle his ears, do any number of other things that I might want to do. Any questions about any of that? How I did any of it, or need to see anything again? I mean, you got to speak up. Speak up if you need me to show you something again, because otherwise I can't really tell. So. But regardless, these are techniques we're going to use as long as we're using After Effects. These are going to come back around over and over again. I kind of crammed a lot of them into one thing, but think that'll be okay. But it's really just kind of, and we can adjust, like his whiskers wiggle and then his eyes blink one after the other. That may not actually be a very realistic kind of a movement. If I go back into this character, I could take and start the eye blink a little earlier so that the whiskers wiggle and the eye blink actually kind of overlap a little bit. And that becomes a much more natural, normal kind of a movement. So drop back into my animation. And now I'm kind of overlapping some of these movements to make them a little more realistic. Overlapping movements and, time from one position into another. And aside from the slow in and slow out, I haven't really even used any of my principles of animation yet, which I think we're going to look at before we go. It's about 24 minutes, so. So if nobody has any questions about any of that before I move on, I will stop that.